Hi, my name is Madison Clark, and if you had asked me 5 years ago what my biggest dream was, I would have laughed. I didn't dream about fancy cars or expensive vacations. I didn't care about designer clothes or jet-setting to Paris like some of my friends did. My dream was simple: to own a piece of land I could call my own. Not land handed down to me, not land borrowed or shared, but something I worked for with my own two hands. Something no one could say was a gift or a favor. For years, I worked 2 jobs, teaching at the local elementary school during the day and tutoring high school kids in math and English at night. Summers, when most teachers rested, I signed up for extra classes, summer school sessions, anything to add a few more $100s to my savings account. While others my age were taking trips, getting married, or buying new cars, I drove the same rusted-out Honda Civic I'd had since college. I skipped vacations, skipped family holidays sometimes, and spent weekends working at the library or picking up extra shifts at a coffee shop just to keep saving. And then, finally, 3 years ago, I did it. I found a piece of land just outside Asheville, North Carolina. 5 quiet acres near the French Broad River, framed by tall pines and wildflowers that bloom every spring. There was an old cedar cabin on it, worn from years of neglect, with peeling paint and sagging shutters. Most people would have walked away, but I saw a possibility. When I first stepped onto that property, the air smelled like fresh pine needles and damp earth. The cabin creaked when the wind blew, and the porch steps were soft with rot. But I knew this was it. This was my place, my home. I remember signing the purchase papers at the county office. My hands trembled when I held the pen. Every cent I had worked for, every sacrifice was in that cashier's check. When the clerk stamped the documents and slid them across the desk to me, I felt a rush I can't even describe. For the first time in my life, I owned something no one else had a claim to, or so I thought. At first, my family barely noticed. My parents didn't come to see the property, not even once. My older brother, David, made one offhand remark when I told him. He laughed and said, "Wow, you really did that all on your own? Guess you finally grew up." His tone wasn't admiration. It was mockery disguised as surprise. But I didn't care. I was too busy working on the place. I spent months repairing the cabin, sanding down floors, repainting the porch, patching the roof when it leaked. I planted lavender by the front steps because I loved how it smelled in the evening breeze. I built a small garden out back, and every weekend I drove into town with dirt under my nails and groceries in the trunk, proud to be building a life of my own. Neighbors started to notice. Martha, a widowed woman down the road, brought me fresh eggs from her chickens one afternoon and told me she admired what I was doing. The feed store owner knew me by name by the end of that first year. Slowly, piece by piece, I wasn't just fixing land, I was building a home. But my family? They didn't see it that way. The first time my parents visited, nearly a year later, they stepped onto the porch like they owned the place. My mother's eyes swept over the cabin with that critical glance she'd perfected, and my father muttered something about how it was smaller than he expected. Then came the comments. Quiet at first, subtle, but sharp. "Madison, it's too much work for one woman. Wouldn't it make more sense if David stayed here? He has more use for land than you do. You don't even have a husband or children. What's all this space for?" I brushed it off. I told myself they didn't understand, that they came from a different generation where men were expected to inherit and daughters were expected to marry into someone else's property. But deep down, their words cut. Because this land wasn't a gift. It wasn't an inheritance. It wasn't charity. It was mine. Then, one evening last spring, everything shifted. David showed up unannounced. He stood on my porch, arms crossed, looking around like he was inspecting something that already belonged to him. "You know this land should have been mine, right?" he said. I laughed nervously, thinking he was joking. "What are you talking about, David? I bought this with my money." He didn't laugh. His face hardened. "You're just holding it for me. You know Mom and Dad agree. I'm the oldest. This belongs to me." I felt the blood drain from my face. For years, I had ignored the subtle comments, the dismissive remarks, the way my parents always looked at David as if he carried the family's future on his shoulders. But hearing him say it so plainly, I knew this wasn't just talk. He believed it. That night, after he left, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the deed, my name stamped on it in bold letters. For the first time since I'd bought the land, I felt afraid. I didn't know then just how far he was willing to go. The letter came on a gray September morning. I remember the sky that day. Heavy clouds pressing low, the air damp with the smell of rain. I almost didn't check the mailbox. It was stuffed with flyers, bills, the usual. But near the bottom was a thick envelope with bold black letters stamped across the top. Buncombe County Civil Court Summons. My hands went cold. I tore it open right there on the porch, the damp paper trembling in my grip. And then I saw the words that didn't feel real. Words I had to read 3 times before they made sense. Plaintiff, David Clark. Defendant, Madison Clark. I blinked hard. The lines swam in front of my eyes. And then the charge, unlawful possession of inherited property, breach of family housing agreement. I felt the world tilt under me. Family housing agreement? I'd never heard of such a thing. There was no inheritance, no agreement. I had bought this land. I had the receipts, the deed, the proof. But here it was, in black ink filed in court, my own brother suing me, claiming the land I had worked my whole life to buy was his. I stumbled inside, dropping the rest of the mail on the counter. The summons felt heavy, like a stone in my hands. I flipped to the back page, and there it was. His signature, bold, confident. My brother's name under a lie, and just below it, my parents' signatures as co-witnesses. That was the moment I sat down at my kitchen table and cried. Not loud sobs, just silent tears I couldn't stop. Because suddenly it wasn't just my brother, it was all of them, my own family. For days, I didn't answer the phone, but when I finally picked up, it was my mother's voice, cold, formal. "You should do the right thing, Madison," she said. "Give the land to your brother. Don't drag this family through court." I was shaking, my voice thin with anger. "This is my land. I bought it. Why would you lie for him?" Her reply cut deep. "Because land without a man is wasted. You don't need it, but he does." I hung up before she could say more. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling in the dark, the words running circles in my mind. Wasted, selfish, wrong. But underneath the hurt was something harder. Anger. I pulled the lockbox from under my bed, the one where I kept all my important papers. I spread them across the kitchen table, the purchase contract, the title deed, the property tax receipts. My name, again and again, stamped in black ink. This wasn't wasted. This was mine. The next morning, I drove into Asheville to find a lawyer. The office was sleek and modern, tucked between a yoga studio and a mortgage broker. I sat in a chair across from a young attorney named Claire Donovan, who listened without flinching as I slid the summons across her desk. She skimmed the pages, her brow furrowing. "They're claiming you were holding the land for your brother as part of an informal family agreement," she said. I nearly laughed. "That's insane. There was never any agreement." Claire looked me in the eye. "Then we'll prove it. But you need to understand. In family cases like this, emotion runs high. They'll call you selfish. They'll call you ungrateful. They'll try to paint you as someone who betrayed her own family." I swallowed hard. "They already have." She leaned forward, her voice steady. "Madison, this isn't just about what they say. It's about what you can prove. Do you have documentation?" I nodded. All of it. Contracts, payments, tax receipts, even texts from David when I first bought the land. "Good," she said firmly, "because proof wins cases. Feelings don't." But that night, I discovered something that chilled me to my core. I was sorting through old mail when I noticed an envelope addressed to David Clark at my address. I frowned and opened it. Inside was a bank statement, and there, under current residence, was listed 218 Riverbend Lane, my address, my land. Heat spread through my chest. He wasn't just suing me. He had already changed his records, claiming my farm as his legal residence. I drove straight to the bank the next morning. The teller looked uncomfortable when I explained. Finally, he admitted, "According to our files, David submitted a notarized lease agreement verifying this address." My voice went cold. A lease agreement? Signed by who? He glanced at the screen, then back at me. "Margaret Clark, your mother, right?" My stomach dropped. It wasn't just a lawsuit, it was a plan, carefully staged step by step. My brother, my parents, all of them working together to erase me. That night, I called Claire. "They filed false documents," I said. My voice was shaking. "They're trying to rewrite reality." There was silence on the line, then her steady reply, "Then we fight back with truth. Gather everything, every receipt, every statement, every witness who can confirm you live there alone. We'll build your case piece by piece." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the stack of papers spread out before me. I thought about the years I had worked for this land, every sacrifice, every late night. And I thought about the people who were supposed to protect me, who instead had turned against me. But one thought rose above the hurt, the betrayal, the fear. They might have signatures. They might have lies. But I had the truth, and I was ready to fight for it. Sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my brother's name scrawled in bold across the summons, my parents' signatures right below his. Betrayal isn't just a feeling. It has a weight. It sat on my chest at night, pressing down until I had to get up and pace the floor. But I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I couldn't win this with anger or tears, not with words, not with pleas. In court, feelings didn't matter. Proof did. So I cleared my kitchen table and made it my war desk. First came the deed. My name, Madison Clark, stamped by Buncombe County 3 years ago. No one else. No joint ownership. No family trust. Just me. Then the purchase contract. I could still remember sliding that cashier's check across the counter, my hands trembling as I handed over 10 years of savings. The contract bore both my signature and the seller's, dated and notarized. Next, property tax receipts. Every year since I bought the place, the county had mailed me those statements. Every year, I had written the checks. My brother's name was nowhere on them. But I didn't stop there. Claire's words echoed in my mind. "They'll call you selfish. They'll try to twist this. You need overwhelming proof." So I looked for silence, the absence of David's presence in my life. At the post office, I asked for records. The clerk pulled up 3 years of mail delivery to 218 Riverbend Lane. My name, every bill, every package. No David. Until, of course, last month, when he'd suddenly changed his bank address. "Could you print that?" I asked. She hesitated, but finally nodded. At the utility office, I asked the same question. Who had been paying the bills? They pulled the records. Electricity, water, internet. My name alone since day one. At the local feed store, I leaned against the counter and asked the owner if David had ever been a customer. He laughed. "Your brother? Sweetheart, the man wouldn't know a 50-pound bag of feed if it hit him in the face. You've been my only Clark here for years." I wrote everything down, every detail, dates, names, witnesses. But the most powerful moment came when I visited my neighbor, Martha. She's in her 70s, sharp as a tack, with a memory like a steel trap. When I explained what was happening, her eyes flashed. "I've lived next to you 3 years," she said firmly. "I've never once seen your brother stay the night here. Not once. And I remember last January when that ice storm hit. You were out in the cold hauling firewood. If he lived here, where was he then?" She signed a statement right there at her kitchen table, her neat handwriting steady. I left her house clutching that piece of paper like it was gold. Still, the deeper I dug, the darker things got. Late one night, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. A woman's voice, hesitant. "Ms. Clark? You don't know me, but I used to work at Holloway and Pierce. That's your brother's old law firm." I froze. "Yes? I remember your grandfather's will," she continued. "Your name was in the original draft. Half the land was supposed to go to you. But the final version, your name was gone, erased. Your brother's was there instead." My heart pounded. "Are you saying it was altered?" A pause. Then, "I think so. I made a copy before I left the firm. If you want it, meet me tomorrow at Mill Street Cafe." I barely slept before that meeting. The next morning, I walked into the cafe, the smell of fresh coffee and bread in the air. She was already there, a manila envelope on the table between us. "This is what I saved," she said, sliding it toward me. Inside were 2 documents, one draft of my grandfather's will with my name listed as a beneficiary, and another dated the same day, where my name was erased, cleanly, neatly, replaced by David's. My breath caught. Proof of fraud. She looked me in the eye. "If I'm called, I'll testify. What they did wasn't just unfair, it was wrong." I thanked her so many times she finally smiled. "Just win," she said. "That'll be thanks enough." By the end of that week, my kitchen table looked like a battlefield map. On one side, the deed, the purchase contract, mortgage receipts, tax records, utility bills, postal statements, witness testimony. On the other side, the altered will, the fraudulent lease agreement, the false address change at the bank. Claire came by one evening, her sharp eyes scanning the stacks. She nodded slowly. "This is strong, very strong, but they'll still try to spin it. They'll say you turned your back on family. We need to show the opposite, the times you did help David." I reached for a thin folder at the bottom of the stack. Inside was a check stub, $5,000, money I'd used to pay off David's credit card debt 3 years ago. Next, a printed email chain where I had introduced him to a friend who offered him a job. He never responded. "This isn't about me refusing to help family," I said quietly. "It's about family crossing a line I can't forgive." Claire's lips curved into a faint smile. "Then we'll make sure the judge sees that, all of it." That night, I stood on the porch, staring at the moonlight on the rows of lavender I'd planted by the steps. The farm was quiet, peaceful, like it always had been. But I knew now. Peace doesn't protect itself. You have to defend it. And I would. This wasn't just about acres of land. It was about my name, my work, my life, and I wasn't going to let anyone steal that. The courthouse in downtown Asheville was nothing like my quiet cabin by the river. It was tall, heavy with stone columns, its wooden doors scarred from decades of opening and closing over other people's battles. The air inside smelled faintly of polish and paper, the kind of scent that reminded you this was a place where lives were decided, not just cases. I arrived early, binder in hand, Claire walking beside me in her navy suit. "Simple blouse, dark slacks," she had told me. "Keep it clean, professional. Let the focus stay on your words, not your clothes." I had followed her advice, though my hands still trembled. Outside courtroom 3B, I saw them. David in a perfectly tailored gray suit, his hair slicked back, carrying a leather briefcase like he had been preparing for this moment his whole life. My parents sat on either side of him. My mother wore pearls, her posture stiff, her eyes avoiding mine. My father's jaw was tight, his gaze fixed straight ahead. None of them looked at me. Not once. When the bailiff called our case, we filed into the room. The judge, a tall man with silver hair and an expression carved in stone, adjusted his glasses and glanced down at the docket. "Clark versus Clark," he said evenly. "Plaintiff, David Clark seeking possession of property currently held by the defendant, Madison Clark citing breach of an implied family housing agreement. Defendant contests claiming sole ownership and fraud on part of the plaintiff. We will proceed. The words landed like hammer blows. David's lawyer, a slick man named Talbot, rose first. His voice was smooth, practiced, dripping with confidence. My clients merely seek to resolve a long-standing family misunderstanding, he began. Mr. David Clark was promised housing on this property by his sister during a difficult financial transition. She has since reneged, leaving him with no stability, no home. We asked the court to honor the original promise, the one that family intended. Promise. The word felt like poison. Then David took the stand. He straightened his suit, adjusted his tie, and looked right at the judge, his face calm, practiced. My sister and I have always been close, he began, voice full of false sincerity. When I lost my job last year, she told me I could come stay at the property. But when I arrived, she turned me away. I had to sleep in my car that night. He paused just long enough to let the silence hang, then softly, "This isn't about money. It's about family. I just want the court to make things right." I felt my throat tighten, lies, every word of it. But Claire leaned close and whispered, "Don't react. Not yet." When it was my turn, my hands were steady. Claire guided me through the binder, each piece of evidence like a shield I could finally raise. First, the deed. My name alone, stamped and sealed. Next, the purchase contract. The cashier's check from my account. Then, property tax receipts, mortgage statements, utility bills, every single one in my name alone. Witness statements followed. Martha, the neighbor, swearing David had never lived there. The mail clerk showing no record of his name at my address until last month. The feed store owner laughing at the idea of David ever buying so much as a bag of seed. Talbot tried to poke holes. "Miss Clark, isn't it true you and your brother have had disagreements before?" "Yes," I said calmly. "Like most siblings, but disagreement doesn't erase ownership." "Isn't it true you could have allowed him to stay, regardless of the title?" "I could have," I admitted, "but I didn't, and I never promised I would." The judge's pen scratched across his notepad. Then came the bigger blows. Claire pulled out the 2 drafts of my grandfather's will, one with my name, one without. She handed them to the judge. "Your Honor, these documents show deliberate alteration. The same date, 2 versions. One includes my client as a beneficiary. The other erases her entirely in favor of the plaintiff." Talbot leapt up. "Objection! Irrelevant!" "Overruled," the judge said sharply. The ex-paralegal took the stand. Her testimony was clear, confident. She described the day my mother visited the law office, how the draft was changed afterward. "If I'm called to testify further, I will," she finished firmly. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. David's jaw tightened. My mother's arms crossed, her eyes locked on the table. But Claire wasn't finished. She placed a small recorder on the evidence table. "Your Honor, this is an audio recording from the courthouse hallway earlier today." The judge listened through headphones, his face impassive. But when he looked up, his eyes were sharp as glass. The recording played. David's voice, low and angry. "I don't care about the land. I just don't want her to have it." The judge turned toward him. "Mr. Clark, do you dispute this is your voice?" David swallowed. "No, Your Honor, but no explanation is necessary," the judge cut in. The silence that followed was louder than any gavel strike. By the time both sides rested, the courtroom felt heavier, as if everyone knew the shape of the truth now but didn't dare say it aloud. The judge folded his hands. "I will review the evidence and issue a written decision within 30 days. And just like that, it was over. For now. We filed out of the room. As I passed David, I almost searched for a flicker of the brother I once knew. The boy who had teased me at summer barbecues, who had laughed with me until we cried. But all I saw was a man who had chosen greed over blood. Outside, the crisp autumn air felt like freedom. Claire stopped at the top of the courthouse steps, turning to me. "You were steady, Madison. Clear. That matters," she said. "They'll probably try to settle now. Expect a phone call." "I don't want a settlement," I replied, my voice stronger than I felt. "I want the truth on record." Her smile was small but proud. "Then we keep fighting." That night, back at the cabin, I lit a single lamp and opened the binder again. Every page told the story of the last 3 years, not in words, but in deeds, receipts, and testimony. Proof that what I built was mine. And as the moon rose over the lavender fields outside, I whispered to myself, "This is not just my defense. This is my life. And no matter what happens next, I won't let them take it." 30 days. That was how long the judge said it would take to review the evidence and issue a ruling. But to me, those 30 days felt like 30 years. Every sunrise was heavy with dread. Every sunset felt like another battle lost inside my own chest. I tried to live normally. I still watered the lavender, still repaired the loose boards on the porch, still taught classes at the school. But no matter what I did, the thought sat behind my eyes like a storm cloud. What if they take it? At night, I dreamed of men with bulldozers tearing down my cabin, of David standing on the porch with a grin, my parents applauding behind him. I would wake up in a sweat, clutching the deed I now kept by my bed. Claire checked in often. "Stay calm," she said over the phone. "You presented your evidence. The truth is on your side. The judge will see that." But doubt is a cruel thing. Truth may be clear to you, but in courtrooms, truth has to fight through shadows. The ruling day finally came on a crisp October morning. The courthouse steps were lined with yellow leaves. I arrived early, binder in hand again. Even though the arguments were finished, David was already there, pacing in the hall, his lawyer whispering in his ear. My parents sat stiff on the bench, their eyes avoiding me, their silence louder than any insult. When the bailiff opened the doors to courtroom 3B, we filed inside. The air felt thick, like the whole room was holding its breath. The judge entered, robe flowing, glasses perched low on his nose. He shuffled the papers in front of him, the sound of rustling sheets magnified in the stillness. Then he looked up. "Clark versus Clark," he began. "After review of all evidence, testimony, and legal documents presented, this court is ready to issue its decision." My hands clenched the edge of the bench. "First," the judge said, his tone steady, "the claim of an implied family housing agreement is found to be unsupported. There is no evidence of any such agreement, verbal or written. The plaintiff has failed to provide proof." David's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "Second, the defendant, Madison Clark, has presented extensive documentation of sole ownership. This includes the purchase contract, deed, mortgage statements, tax receipts, and utility bills, all consistent with her testimony. This court recognizes Madison Clark as the sole legal owner of 218 Riverbend Lane." My breath caught. The judge's eyes narrowed as he lifted another sheet. "Third, evidence has been presented indicating potential fraud in alteration of a will, as well as falsified lease agreements and address changes. These matters fall outside the scope of this ruling, but will be referred to the district attorney's office for investigation." The room was silent. I felt my pulse in my ears. "And finally," the judge said, his voice sharp, "the plaintiff's behavior in this matter demonstrates not only a lack of merit in his claim, but also an intent to deceive this court. The lawsuit is dismissed. Costs will be borne by the plaintiff." His gavel struck the wood. "So ordered." It was done. For a moment, I couldn't move. My hands were numb, my heart hammered in my chest. Claire placed a steady hand on my arm. "You won, Madison," she whispered. David's face twisted in fury. He leaned toward his lawyer, hissing something I couldn't hear. My mother's lips were pressed into a thin line. My father rubbed his forehead, refusing to meet my eyes. As people began filing out, I sat frozen, as if I needed to hear the words again to believe them. I had won. The land was mine. The lies had collapsed under the weight of truth, but victory tasted different than I expected. I thought I'd feel joy, relief, triumph. Instead, there was a hollow ache in my chest, a grief that came not from losing the land, but from losing the people I had once called family. Outside, on the courthouse steps, reporters were waiting. The case had stirred whispers in the community. Siblings dragging each other through court always drew attention. "Ms. Clark," one of them called, thrusting a microphone toward me, "how does it feel to win against your own brother?" I paused. The autumn wind tugged at my hair. Finally, I said, "It doesn't feel like winning. It feels like surviving." The truth came out, and I'm grateful for that. But this was never about destroying family. It was about protecting what I built. No one, not even family, has the right to erase your work. Claire nodded beside me, proud. That evening, I returned to the cabin. The sun was dipping low, painting the lavender field in gold. The land looked exactly as it had the day I first saw it. Quiet, steady, waiting for me. I walked the boundary line slowly, touching the fence posts one by one. Each post was a reminder of the hours I had poured into this place. Each acre, a memory of sweat, sacrifice, and hope. Inside, I set the deed on the table, lit a candle, and just sat in silence. I thought about David, about the little boy who once shared his Halloween candy with me, who once promised we'd always look out for each other. Where had he gone? What had greed done to him? And I thought about my parents, about how easily they had chosen a son over a daughter, tradition over truth. The wound of that choice was deeper than any lawsuit. But then I looked around my cabin, smelled the lavender drifting through the open window, heard the soft rush of the river beyond the trees, and I realized this land wasn't just dirt and timber. It was proof. Proof that I could stand on my own, even against the people who should have stood with me. I didn't celebrate that night. There was no champagne, no victory dance. I simply sat with the truth. I had kept my land. I had kept my dignity. And though the price was heavy, I had proven something even heavier. That lies cannot bury truth, and that no court, no family, no betrayal can erase the work of your own hands. The verdict was mine. But the peace would take longer to rebuild. The weeks after the verdict felt strangely quiet. For months, my life had been consumed by paperwork, deadlines, meetings with Claire, nights of restless sleep, mornings of dread. Every day had been lived in anticipation of the courtroom, of David's accusations, of the possibility that everything I had built could be stripped from me. And then suddenly it was over. The case was closed. The land was mine. But victory didn't feel like a parade. It felt like silence. The first Saturday after the ruling, I stood on the porch with a cup of coffee and looked out at the lavender fields. The plants swayed gently in the breeze, their fragrance drifting up to meet me. I should have felt peace. Instead, I felt the hollow ache of absence. No phone calls from my parents, no messages from David, even my relatives, cousins, aunts, uncles, stayed away, afraid to take sides. Family gatherings ended overnight. Thanksgiving came and went without an invitation. For the first time in my life, I realized family could disappear even while they were still alive. But slowly, something else began to grow in the emptiness they left behind. Neighbors I barely knew started dropping by. Martha from next door brought me pumpkin bread one afternoon and said, "Took guts to stand up to them, honey. Not many would have had the strength." The feed store owner shook my hand when I came in to buy supplies. "Heard about the case. Folks around here respect you for fighting it. You didn't just win land. You showed them you can't be pushed around." Even some of my students' parents stopped me in town, offering quiet words of encouragement. One mother pressed a note into my hand. "Thank you for showing my daughter that women can stand their ground." I hadn't realized until then how many eyes had been watching. One evening, Claire came out to the cabin. She wasn't in a suit this time, just jeans and a sweater, her hair loose. She sat on my porch swing, sipping sweet tea, and said, "Cases like this, they don't just change your life. They ripple outward. People see you, Madison. They see what you did, and it gives them courage." I looked at her, surprised. Courage? Claire, all I did was defend what was mine. She smiled softly. That's exactly why it matters. But even with the support, the nights were hardest. Sometimes I lay awake staring at the ceiling, remembering David's face in the courtroom, the way his jaw tightened when the evidence stacked against him, the way he couldn't even look at me when the verdict was read. I remembered the sound of my mother's voice, cold and dismissive. "Land without a man is wasted." The words haunted me. They reminded me that no matter how much I had proven legally, I could never rewrite the beliefs etched deep into their hearts. So I stopped trying. Instead, I poured myself into the land. I built a new fence along the back field, painted the cabin shutters a soft green, planted rows of sunflowers to catch the morning light. My hands were always busy, dirt under my nails, sweat on my brow. And as the weeks passed, the ache in my chest slowly turned into something steadier. One Saturday, Martha stopped by again. She watched me hammering a board into place and said, "Looks like you're building a life, not just fixing a house." I wiped the sweat from my forehead and laughed. Maybe I am. Winter came early that year. Snow dusted the lavender fields, blanketing the land in white. I sat by the fire, a book in my lap, and realized for the first time in months that I felt calm. Not happy, not triumphant, but calm. And in that quiet, I began to heal. I realized that losing my family's approval hadn't broken me. What had nearly broken me was believing I needed it in the first place. The land was never about inheritance. It was never about family legacy. It was about me, my work, my sacrifice, my future. And no verdict, no betrayal could take that away. On New Year's Eve, I stood outside at midnight, watching fireworks bloom faintly over Asheville in the distance. The air was sharp, my breath clouding in the cold. I whispered to the land, to the sky, to myself, "This is home, and I'm not afraid anymore." Months later, a letter arrived. Not from the court this time, from my brother. It was short, scrawled in his hurried handwriting. "I never thought it would go that far. I just didn't want you to have it. Guess I was wrong. Don't expect me to apologize. But I won't fight you again. David." I folded the letter carefully, placed it in a drawer, and walked outside. The sun was shining on the lavender, the river glinting in the distance. His words didn't heal anything. They didn't erase the scars. But they proved something. Even he knew the fight was over. I stood on the porch, breathing in the scent of pine and earth, and felt a steady truth settle deep inside me. The storm had passed. I had lost family, but I had found something harder, stronger, truer. Myself. And in that discovery, I realized sometimes surviving is the victory. In the end, Madison Clark didn't just win a piece of land. She won something far greater, the right to stand tall against betrayal, even when it came from her own blood. Her brother thought lies and tradition would bury her, but the truth stood stronger. She lost the warmth of family, but found something deeper, her own strength, her dignity, and the unshakable knowledge that what she built with her own hands could never be stolen. This story reminds us all, sometimes the hardest battles are not fought with strangers, but with those closest to us. And sometimes, surviving the storm is the greatest victory of all. So if you were in her place, what would you choose? The land, your honor, or family ties? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next gripping and mysterious stories we bring to you.